come here and talk about reflections and lessons from London in just 15 minutes is just a task too far. There's so many things I would love to share with you that I've learned along the way. So I thought I would keep it really focused and tight. Pete, talk about the things you know, which are much, much fewer, the things that I really can say as a consequence of all of these experiences really stand up to scrutiny, the test of does that really work or not. But actually on reflection, thinking about that phrase, this much I know, probably the most useful thing I can share with you all this morning in the next 15 minutes about the stories of the success of London 2012 is that actually it was probably true to say it's this much we knew. I'm not going to probably tell you anything you don't already know or hasn't already been captured and written and evidenced before. What for me is interesting about London as a phenomenon is the extent to which it shakes us all up to reflect on actually when we do things in the right way, when we get the basics right, it's extraordinary how good things can be. So that's really the gist of my theme. And really the things I want to touch on are about the clarity of mission and just how you move from that to an action plan that develops and reinforces the kinds of systems that we believe now lie behind the successes that were achieved, probably not just by the athletes and the sports in London, but I suspect from where I sat on this journey, equally applicable to the people who made the bid, who then activated the plan to deliver the games, the people that built the stadia, the people that did the logistics, the people that organized the incredible volunteer workforce of 70,000 people plus, who really made the whole thing fly. It's fundamental stuff and we know it, but probably what these events do so well is just to remind us of those things. I'll also talk a little bit about this notion of talent and why some people just seem to be able to perform at such a high level, key to all of us in our roles in business and in sport. And I want to just touch also on this notion of sustainability, how you just keep it going, and about the planning and the behaviors that ultimately seem to lie at the heart of that. But probably as I'm going to come on to argue, the rationalist in me would always want to do is just to stop and check that it was as good as we think it was. Many of the, I suppose, rivals of Team GB in the Olympics are probably still, even today, trying to persuade themselves that it was either just an incredible perfect storm of circumstance that gave us those 65 medals and a third place finish in the Olympic and the third place finish in the Paralympic table. The numbers, the metrics, the analysis clearly say that wasn't the case. And on that rare occasion, I think in sport you can honestly say when it's as good as this, it really is this good. The other argument they'll probably come up with is this notion of home advantage, that when you have that opportunity to stage an Olympic or Paralympic Games, that just the opportunities that creates, because the government are going to throw money at you and there's the emotion of the crowd behind you, maybe that's the reason we were as good as we are. I have to say, having lived that journey for 7 years, all I can really say that home advantage felt like is a gun to your head in all sorts of ways. It was probably a compulsion that I think, joking aside, was an incredible positive, but actually for some was a negative. There's no doubt in my mind that some individuals and some of the bits of the systems couldn't quite cope with that loaded gun at the head, that level of expectation. But for me, I suppose that the story has to start, as has already been said by Dominic, with this notion of a clear and compelling vision. That really, I suppose, the gift given to me and thousands of others in British sport, best encapsulated by Jacques Rogge opening that envelope in Sydney and I think looking quite surprised at the word he read in front of him and saying London. What an opportunity. Probably for most people, and I would have been amongst them on that very moment, it was still a daydream, it was still almost a fantasy of an opportunity that suddenly, in almost a millisecond, became a crystallizing vision, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen. So that sort of almost sense of call to arms, that incredible sense of opportunity, whilst I can quite happily concede that is almost impossible probably to achieve in many business scenarios, is still the place we have to start this analysis from. Just how motivating that can be, but equally just how scary that can be. So sort of a theme running through what I'll say for the next 10 minutes or so is it's easy in sport because you have these wonderfully clear targets and goals and aspirations. So London 2012, it's going to happen. We've already moved in a millisecond from a daydream, an opportunity that many of us would have perhaps hoped for, to a compelling vision of what can be. But of course, for that to have any chance of being realized, you then need a compelling plan to follow, which is really where my personal story, I suppose, comes alive in terms of the next few months. I spent the autumn of 2005 doing what I think actually culturally we're probably particularly good at in the UK, and that's actually being very rational and very calm and measured about something as audacious as stage and be the best you can be in an Olympic Games in 7 years' time. So I kind of went right back to fundamentals and basics and, well, okay, if we've got 6 and a bit years from when we can activate a plan, how much can you move in 6.5 years as an individual athlete, as a sport, as a program? What's the rate of change that's possible to basically move from wherever you are as a benchmark of performance and output, whatever, to the best you think you can possibly be? So scope the possibility. Secondly, in every sense of the word, what does that cost? Not just in financial terms, but literally the hours of training, the numbers of flights, the places you have to go to in the world to qualify, to progress, and in the vast majority of cases of our sports, not to turn up to London by right, but actually win your place in the competition. Most sports have to qualify by right. There are a few that are given what we call home nation places, but the vast majority, it's business as usual. You still have to be good enough. So there's an awful lot of stuff there to bring together into what I think was quite a compelling business case, which in my part of the role had to go to government, had to go past the Chancellor and get signed off. We clearly needed more resource than we had at the time. The way the press reported that, and I have to say is still a source of some irritation to me, was that it was fundamentally a transactional thing. This amount of money will give you this amount of medals. X plus Y equals Z. Off you go. And the reason that will always haunt me is because somewhere buried on my laptop is a little video clip. Some of you may recall it. The Brem, the Bird and Fortune, the satirical program, did a spoof on the way the media ran this story, which was the two of them sitting there having a joke about the fact that actually, queuing up for their money because money equals medals, and it was all about, wasn't the winning or the taking part anymore, it was about the spending of the money. So it felt very transactional, but fundamentally, I suppose the point I have to make is for the kind of success that I think we've just seen, yes, you need the daydream and the fantasy. Yes, you need the compelling vision, but you also need the nuts and bolts planning to follow. The second part of the story, I suppose, and again revisiting probably very familiar territory as a refresher, is the fact that that plan changes. Life is never quite that simple. It isn't joining up the dots. Very true in sport, I'm sure very true in business too. Probably for me, the crunch point to share with you in terms of that evolving picture then of, okay, resource in, launch the mission, crack on. It's not actually the year-to-year metrics of performance evaluation as such, but probably a key point on that journey where we had to take the game up a level. And that step up, that breakthrough, was probably the most important thing I'll share with you today in terms of insights around what really worked. Beijing was a bit of a breakthrough, clearly. We had a tremendous performance from some sports in particular, but the possibility of what London could be was first really seen in athletic performance terms in Beijing. We won 47 medals. Probably were a little bit fortunate to come fourth in the medal table, as most people want to evaluate it in the Olympics, and second in the Paralympics. But for me, the most important thing that happened then was partly the anticipation of the squeeze coming, because as we all know, that was at a time when, in effect, the banking crisis and the stalling economy was suddenly becoming an absolute reality. Government was locking down, and I suppose if I could take you into that bizarre sensation in sport in the August of 2008, of realizing we're winning big, our graph is doing this, the funders is doing that. So the inevitable was around the corner. We're going to have to come back from Beijing and face, in effect, a cut in budget. And it was the thing that, in a sense, forced us, particularly at UK Sport, to do something very, very important, which was to capture all the principles and the lessons that would really driven that initial business plan and all the performances from 2005 to 2008 into a set of very simple guiding principles, which were, I suppose, always there in our minds and in our actions, but were not explicitly captured. Because what that actually enabled us to do was to lock down the mission in terms of the absolute non-negotiables. It kind of says these are the things that if we budge on, we will lose. Everything else is up for grabs, but these guiding principles basically said this is why we have to do certain things, whether it's about prioritizing of funding, check and challenge to sports in terms of performance metrics, the culture, the behaviors that are fundamental to this, as it seemed to us, emerging winning formula. Because whilst most of the stories about London are about success and achievement, actually the 4 years, in particular from 2008 to 2012, were very, very hard, not just for the athletes training, the staff supporting them, but actually even at the strategic level, being able to hold the line against the squeeze on budgets, the pressure to perform, and all the sometimes weekly needs of politicians and other stakeholders to spin a story or to change direction or to be blunt, to play with the formula. We had, as we all have to do in life, had to bend and adapt and change, but I have to say we never wavered significantly from those guiding principles. Now they are evolving. We've just reviewed them again, and part of my message this morning about that continuous process of change leaning to sustainability. It's not like they're literally etched in tablets of stone. They are not the 10 Commandments, although there are 10 of them. They are morphing, but I suspect we will settle into a pattern where we just check them every 2 to 3 years. Do they still hold up? Is there a tweak here? But fundamentally, those are guiding the processes, the thinking, the logic, the rationale behind everything that we do. If we'd have tried to capture them at the point of launch, as it were, I suspect we'd have got them wrong. Because actually, until we had that breakthrough in Beijing, to lock them down and to be able to defend them in the way we were, would have been very difficult without those early wins. So there's definitely a pattern there. Dream, vision, plan, activate. When you're starting to see the impact of it, that's probably the time to really crystallize down what the essence of it is and make it very visible, very understood. The second part of the story is so much about the people that actually performed, and not just the athletes and the staff that work with them. I'd go right to the volunteers, everybody who stepped up and probably even surprised themselves about what they were capable of. I struggle with the word talent. I struggle increasingly with the word talent because for me, the way we've thought about it in sport hasn't always helped us really get our heads around the reality of elite performance. Because I have to stand here in front of you and admit that actually in the vast majority of cases, the story I see is that ordinary people do extraordinary things. They have extraordinary ideas, they exhibit extraordinary behaviors, but at their core, in most cases, fundamentally, they're like you and I, right through to the Chris Hoys. And I know that because quite literally in elite sport, for weeks on end, you live together in training camps, you see the reality of most people's lives in a way that you probably don't do in business and education, because you have breakfast with them, you have dinner with them, and you spend all day and night talking and thinking sport performance. And actually, most of it's very mundane. So if it's not simply talent in the sense of I see somebody has an ability to do something which makes them stand out from a pack, either interview or a selection trial, what is making these people go on to be extraordinary performers? For me, the better word is actually aptitude, in the sense of I've seen something, I've measured something, I've observed a set of behaviors that say you've got it more than the others for this post or this opportunity. But two other things are absolutely massively important. One is, I think, best thought of as energy, drive. And I think actually in most cases when I think about those ordinary people doing extraordinary things, they draw that energy and drive from the clarity of the mission that they've either been given or they sat from themselves. And the energy is actually about anxiety, bizarrely. And we're designed to function by that mechanism, by the way, I think. When I say anxiety, I mean essentially that constant nagging fear, doubt, uncertainty that something you really care about as an end result is uncertain. You cannot be certain you're going to win, you're going to get the result. And in a paradoxical sense, that's good because it's what drives you on. The other thing that I think is really making the difference here is the quality of the support and the environment around those individuals. And whilst I'm probably the expert that could tell you about the athletes and how good that can be in the sense of allowing them to take risks and to experiment and to actually do the things that fascinate them. Because actually I think when we see aptitude, what often we see is just something about somebody that says they simply love doing the process. The quality of the environment you can create around people and enable them to do the thing that they're passionate about is so important. I think we saw that probably clearer than any other place in the volunteer workforce, who are mostly, I suspect, by any measure, particularly ordinary people. And yet my encounter with them on a day-to-day basis going in and out of the venues was absolutely extraordinary. The quality of engagement, how people were prepared to step up. The final thought I want to leave you with, which has been an ongoing journey for me throughout this period leading up to London and indeed beyond, is I suppose best put under that headline of sustainability, but it also links to planning and everything else I've shared with you. The phrase that probably makes the most sense to me in terms of the culture that's won in sport and will continue to win is that sense of being together, all being on the bus, all have that commonality of purpose and commitment, which, as I've said and acknowledged, is arguably so much easier in sport than in business. But actually, you need a couple of people stood on top of the bus too, whose job it is just to constantly look a little bit further than everybody else can see and to anticipate the need to plan and prepare for the sorts of events that most people in the bus are actually not worrying about. In elite sport in particular, you can almost say that the entire business is about succession planning. We know it takes 8 to 10 years to incubate an athlete of some aptitude through to being a reliable enough performer to win consistently at Olympic level. The danger, therefore, is if you just allow a single generation to get there and sustain that pathway of performance, you actually build in a sense, a latent period where you're going to have nobody coming through because it almost block the pathway. So in order to keep the pressure on, you're constantly looking to put new talent, as we sometimes call it, underneath and push up. There's also something about looking beyond the here and now in terms of the immediate wins to plan in the sorts of processes that will then prepare for the next cycle. Probably the least popular thing I did in my role at UK Sport was to actually initiate all the planning, literally in a business sense, for Rio 18 months ago. So to the leaders of our sports, they were not only having to finish the job for London, they were having to start their business plan, which actually they're literally, as I stand here today, having to present one after the other to UK Sport for funding for the next 4 years. But I knew that if we'd waited till after the Games, we'd have lost an entire year of planning to the typical fallout and reflection and behaviours that follow something like a home Olympics. Uncomfortable, awkward, and yet looking forward, absolutely the right thing to do, which I'm pleased to say they're all willing to acknowledge at the moment. I'll pause and start to sum up there, but if I can, just to go back to where I started with, I doubt I've actually shared anything with you that's fundamentally different to what you know lies behind most success in medium to long-term business ventures. And I've also acknowledged the fact that probably in elite sport it seems like it's easier for us because the plans are so much clearer, because the targets are so much clearer. You can focus on the hows, the when, the wheres. I'll finish with this observation though, because the why is slightly harder for us. Why do we do it? And what do those medals really mean? Of late, I've tended to think actually that when I'm trying to justify the funding that went into elite sport and will continue in it for the foreseeable future, in terms of medals and medalists and the value we attach to those. But the conclusion I'm increasingly coming to is actually we're a two-skew business. We have only two products or commodities, dreams and memories. In elite sport, what we have to first identify and then support as best we can are the dreams that some individuals have to be extraordinary in their performances. And they're very special dreams. And what's interesting about elite sport is when you get it right, how transferable and almost infective those dreams can be to others. But it's also the memories, not just that those individuals who won and won big in London and elsewhere have, but probably the memories we all have and just how remarkably sustainable they are. I suspect that not just this Christmas when we see all the replays of London, probably feel about tearful about just how good it was, but I suspect if we see them in 20 years and we can remember back to this point, they'll still move us. There's something particularly tangible about the memories from sport. But I want to leave you with that thought that whilst it probably sounds a little bit easier for us, the essence of what we're really all about is actually very hard to measure. And that's our challenge. Thank you.